I'm John Buchanan. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to take a sort of step back in time to a time when audio wasn't tempo locked. Let me tell you a little story. So Will and I met. It was a beautiful sunny day, working on a magazine called Future Music in the UK. May it rest in peace. And the thing that was so exciting about those early days of us working on magazines together was that on the cover of Future Music, there was a CD, and the CD contained samples, including, I think it's fair to say, some kind of fast and loose stuff as far as copyright might be concerned. I'm pretty sure that the CD on the front of the first ever issue of Future Music, for instance, contains the Amen break. Anyway, let's not worry about that now. But let's move on. But the thing that was interesting about the audio on that CD and on CDs, on magazines like that at the time, which became incredibly popular, was that they were just full of sonic fodder. And what would happen was that, of course, producers would load those CDs up, listen to the content on them, and when they found something they were interested in, they would either sample it or they would find other ways of thinking about how they might be able to kind of use that content. And of course, in sampling it, they had a whole series of decisions to make, particularly for loop-based material. How do we get that stuff in time to make it part of our project? Fast forward to the here and now, and of course, I'm constantly talking about the kind of amazing sonic playground that is the loop browser and the fact that we can just drag and drop content in. But of course, it saves us so much of the hassle of trying to work out what tempos are, because all of that content is written with its tempo written in, which means that when we drag it and drop it, it just conforms to tempo. And that's fine and everything, but I like the idea that, particularly bearing in mind people are still into crate digging and looking for loops and samples, that actually we should know how to bring in a piece of audio and to have it decide what the tempo of our project's going to be and how we might go about detecting it. So there's a nice long intro. Let's listen to a piece of music that badly needs a beat loop but doesn't have one yet. Okay, so here's a funky little tune at 112 beats per minute. That's the project that I've kind of written this at, and there are a couple of bits of audio in here already which I've kind of brought in and that are working with the current tempo of the piece. But what I've also got sitting on my desktop is a drum loop, which is called Drum Loop. That's right. And what I'm going to do is to simply drag that and put it into my project, and I'm going to let go of it. And this is very much like the kind of audio that you'll find if you decide to either record or drag and drop a sample in from a sample CD. Those things still even exist, or whatever those libraries might be, wherever you might get a piece of audio where you don't know its tempo. And immediately what we're going to discover is some of the things that happen when we just drag and drop in audio, either that we've recorded or found. The first one of those things being, we have absolutely no idea really where this audio file starts, how long it lasts before the bits that we need, all of that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is to solo it, and we're just going to listen to it all by itself, and we're going to listen to the whole of the audio file, including the silence at the beginning and the silence at the end, which we're going to need to do something about. Now, the thing that's so interesting about loops like this, so we've got, I think, 4 bars of this drum loop that's happening here. But one thing that's particularly interesting is that as well as having silence at the beginning and at the end, there are a few things about this loop that are kind of interesting. It kind of pushes a little bit. Yes, we've got a defined downbeat at the start, but at the very end where the toms happen, we don't have a defined beat off at the end, so we have a little bit of reverb on the end. So actually working out where this little bit of audio should loop is going to present some issues for us, but some exciting ones, I think, and ones that we can resolve. So firstly, let's find out whether or not this track, this loop, is actually in time with the rest of the project. What I'm going to do is to do the first thing that I think we will need to do, which is that's what I'm actually trying to say there, which is to get the first kick drum to actually line up with the beginning of the track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and do that kind of manually. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to get my scissors tool out and I'm going to chop the obviously silent start of this file off, and we're just going to get rid of that. And then what I'm going to do is to zoom in quite a long way to see whether or not I can more or less find the start of this downbeat. And it looks like it's about there to me. But this is the first thing that's interesting. Of course, depending on how far in we zoom, we're actually going to discover that probably that isn't the most accurate chop I've ever made in terms of trying to find the start point of a downbeat. Sure enough, it turns out that there's actually more silence on the beginning of this waveform than I had anticipated based on the magnification of what I was looking at in the first place. So I am going to throw away this bit of silence too, but to really place the downbeat of this sample, what I'm going to do is to come back to the pointer tool, double click on this audio loop, and I'm then going to come to the file menu rather than the track menu, and then I have a chance to see much more clearly the actual waveform display. And what I can then do is to grab the left-hand edge of this little blue marker where it says drum loop 2.2, and I can put it right on where I think the start of that sample is. And now I think we are pretty much hard in on the beginning of that little bit of audio. Okay, so now the thing I need to do is to try and place it at the beginning of bar 6. Again, I'm going to just drag it there and hopefully we'll be in good shape, and I think that's about there. But there's a quicker way to be able to do that too. If I move the playhead to bar 6, and what I do is to just literally leave it there, if I then press the semicolon button on my keyboard, the currently selected region will jump to the playhead. That's really useful. It's also really useful if you're a sound designer. If you're ever working to picture and you want to take a spot effect and you want to put it right on the moment where the thing happens, all you have to do is to move the playhead to where the thing happens and place that bit of audio right there. Really useful. Okay, so we've got the start point all sorted. Let's find out if this is in time with the rest of the track. Don't you hate it when the drummer plays slower than the rest of the band? Sacked! Okay, so what we've got here is a drum loop that's finishing late, which tells me immediately that it's slower than everything else. Now, I suppose what we could do, and this is definitely a completely legitimate approach to trying to work out what the tempo is I could just slow the project tempo down. And because the drum loop is now fixed in terms of its start point, that isn't going to move. So we probably could run this round on a loop, adjusting the tempo manually until we found out the right tempo. But that just feels a little bit too old school. So let's not do that, but you could if you wanted to. So let's look at some of the more modern ways that we might be able to detect the tempo of this drum loop. The first thing I'm going to do is to select this track, and I'm going to use an absolute cheat plugin, which is called BPM Counter. So again, we can just search for that here. We'll find it right here. I can open up the version of that I want to use. I can press play, and in real time, the BPM counter will try and find out what the tempo of the project is. So it's had a bit of a listen and it thinks it's at 108. Sorry, I said the project tempo, I meant the loop tempo. It has detected that the loop tempo is 108 beats per minute, and obviously our global tempo up here is at 112. So let's find out if it got it right. If I change the project tempo overall to 108, what happens now? Does the drummer sound like they now fit with the rest of the band? Yes, is the answer. They do sound like they fit with the rest of the band. So that was easy. You can stop watching now. If you want to use the tempo BPM counter to detect tempo, then you can absolutely do that. But don't stop watching, because we're going to look at some other ways that you could also do this too. So let's get rid of the BPM counter and let's pretend that we don't know the tempo of the file. I can't even remember it, can you? I can't, except that the project tempo is telling us that it's 108 back to 112. It's like it never happened. That whole other chapter has been erased from our minds. Okay, so we're still working at 112 and we don't know the tempo of our drum loop. Okay, so what we could do instead, let's suppose that instead, let's just take it over here for a moment. What we're going to do is to work on this in isolation to save me having to press sort of go on or solo every time I want to listen to it. We're going to just sort of go and work on this drum loop in isolation for a moment. We know we've got the start point nailed down. So that's all fine. But what I could instead do would be to click on this region and use a different type of function to analyze the tempo of this individual audio file and apply its tempo to the project. And the way that I could do that would be to come to Edit and to come to Tempo, at which point I've got a couple of options here at the start. So one of them says Apply Region Tempo to Project Tempo. Well, that sounds like exactly what we want to do. We want to take this region and we want to turn whatever its tempo is into the project tempo. So I'm going to select that option. And what I get a chance to do is to have this little pop-up window happen. And what it's going to do is to say, right, this function applies the tempo of the selected region to the project tempo. It can also align the region to the downbeat. Okay, and I've checked the box to say that I would like it to align the downbeat to the nearest project downbeat. Well, I feel like I've made that pretty easy for Logic because I've done that already. I've moved it right to the beginning of bar 12. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to close that little box down for a moment and I'm going to pretend that, firstly, I haven't chopped the start off it, and also that we're going to just get that out of position a little bit. And then I'm going to run exactly that moment again. After all, we kind of want this function to make life really easy for us. So firstly, I want it to put the downbeat on the project downbeat, so the nearest downbeat. And what I want to do is to have the detected tempo become the project tempo. Let's see if it works. Maintain relative positions of all other regions. I don't really know what that does, but let's go for it. Okay, so it looks like it's moved. For a start, what we've now got is a downbeat which is sitting on the downbeat. Well, kind of, as said before, as I discussed before, as we looked at before, it sort of has. It's moved it closer, but there is still this little bit of gap. Let's see what it's done from a tempo perspective. Okay, so it turns out the tempo is now at 108.1014, which is actually my favorite tempo to work at. It's always important to be within accurate to 1/10,000th of a BPM. It's the sort of precision we're talking about here, people. Okay, let's see whether or not it feels like that's in time. The only way we're really going to know is if we put the click track on and we press play and we listen to the beat loop relative to the click track. Okay, well that does sound pretty good. It seems like it's worked. So I tell you what, let's just take this whole thing across to the rest of the track and let's see if we can get that to line up. Now, of course, the problem is going to slightly be here that I've put this sort of silence on the front of it, which means moving this to exactly the right position is going to be quite hard, but I think we can probably make that happen. If I zoom out enough, feels like it's probably there. Let's see if that's right. Yeah, I think that's going to be right. Let's have a look. Okay, so that isn't right. And we discovered that the tempo was at 108.1014, I think. And it doesn't appear to be. If I come back to this particular part of the piece, we're still at 112, which is where my track was originally sort of working at from a tempo perspective. So in order to understand what's actually happened, because it was supposed to apply this globally, or certainly to the project tempo, not globally as it turns out, what appears to have happened instead is that whilst I'm at 112 at this point in my track, if I come back somewhere within this audio file, there we are, we're at 108.1014. So it looks to me like it's actually created a tempo change for this bit of audio. And I think we'll be able to find out if that's true if we come to the list editors and we come to tempo. Sure enough, the track is at 112 beats per minute until the fourth semiquaver of bar 11, which is about here-ish, which is where it then produces a tempo change. And then there's another one at the end of that audio to a much more obscure tempo, which is not in any way my favorite tempo, 108.09999. Who needs that? Okay, so this is where life's going to become incredibly confusing. It hasn't applied this globally. What it's done is to create a tempo change at the point that the audio file happens. It's done an okay job of placing it on the downbeat. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. But the much more important thing is it hasn't created a tempo change which is going to be globally applied from start to finish. So if I want to work at 108.1 014, it gets harder and harder to say, I'm going to need to apply that tempo to position number 1 as well, so that we're working at that tempo right from the beginning, which is a bit of a faff, isn't it? The whole idea of just being able to apply a global tempo change is a problem. And also, it's really worth bearing in mind that if you don't know that, you'll be wondering why none of your loops are in time, and then why you suddenly have a tempo change at a particular point in your track. And just to really shine a light on that, imagine you had delays running live or any other effects that were tempo dependent. Everything is going to go a bit weird at that point. So if I don't want a tempo change and I just want to work at this speed, what I'm going to need to do is to make 108.1014 the tempo of my track from the very first bar, and that means that I can then throw away both of those, but it also means that this little piece of audio is going to have moved. Are you keeping up? Why is it going to have moved? Well, because of course its start point is at the beginning of this little bit of audio file, which lies somewhere randomly just after beat 3 of bar 5, which means that this is no longer going to be in time on the downbeat, because it was at that position at 112 beats per minute, but it's at a different position when we're at the tempo we're working at now. So what I'm going to need to do now is to make a manual little adjustment to get this in time. I'm going to use nudge, option and arrow left and right to just nudge this until it's roughly in time. And then what I'm going to need to do is to again manually move it until it feels like it's even better in time. Whew, deep breath. Let's have a listen. But that does feel like it's working quite nicely. So what we've had a chance to do there is to use a couple of bits of technique, something we've looked at already, which is the idea of chopping really hard on a downbeat, but also just making sure that we're nudging things around and looking for them. But what we've now got is a track that is working and feels like it's in time. Now, I always used to say to myself when I was importing audio from sample CDs and I was chopping things up and I found myself close enough to a kind of integer here, a whole number without decimal places, to possibly think that user error, i.e. me, was the reason why the track wasn't working at 108 beats per minute. So in other words, if this said 108.5 and it was a free tempo bit of recording and it was a live drum loop, well, it might well be 108.5, but it sort of feels to me like I might be a little bit out here. So what I'm actually going to do is to just see what happens when I make the tempo of this 108. Does it still sound like it's in time? And the answer is yes. So if it turns out that you really do want to work at a particular whole number, you absolutely can. But if you're confident in where you've chopped and you've placed individual bits of your file, then that works too. One more thing just before we wrap up this episode. With a file like this, where what we've got is a tom fill on the end, which has got some reverb on it, we can see, now that we know what the tempo is, that obviously the next or the repeat of this loop should really happen on that downbeat there. That's where the loop's going to need to restart, which means I'm going to need to chop that bit of reverb off if I want the loop to just cycle round accurately. And again, I also need to chop the front of it too, so that we're in a position to have that loop just happen all over again. And probably in the context of the whole track, that will probably sound all right. Let's find out. I'll run the end of it. Well, it sounds quite looped, but it does sort of sound all right. But if I run it just by itself, I think this drum loop's going to sound quite weird. And it does. And the reason for that is that the kind of weirdness of that tom being cut off prematurely is really obvious when we hear it like this. There's this kind of click where we go back into the downbeat, and also it just feels like a loop. Now, sometimes loops feeling like loops is exactly what we want, and musically you could absolutely make that decision that stylistically you kind of want that abrupt end to it. But actually the truth of the matter is that the only way you're going to make that feel natural is to actually duplicate this, take this loop down to another track and extend the length of both of them. Why is that? Well, it's because there isn't a downbeat on this particular moment of the drum loop. So if I want the reverb tail of the toms to overlap, but I want to hear the full version of the downbeat of that kick drum, I'm going to need the two things to overlap, and a crossfade isn't going to do it, because if I crossfade between those two positions, we're going to lose the impact of the kick drum. It won't be loud enough because it will be sharing volume with the end of that tom. So this is my best option in terms of just making sure that the loop feels natural. And if I really want it to feel natural, what I might slightly do is to just open up the start of there as well to make sure that I'm absolutely not clipping off the front of that kick drum. So in this video, we've looked at a lot of ways of taking a drum loop whose tempo we didn't know and bringing it into a project and making it be the determining factor of the tempo of the track that we're working on. We wanted the drum beat to be the click track. And so as a result of that, the whole of the rest of the track has been adjusted. But unlike Apple loop content, where the tempo is written in and we can just drag it and drop it and make that decision automatically, we've had to do it manually. And it's like stepping back in time to the late Ice Age.